the thing about risks is that you have to analyze them individually and say, what can you do? Many of these we've talked about are structural, and some of them are operational ones. The more structural ones, there's actually, if you've got a structural problem, best way to solve a structural problem is to change structure. And there are three different structural options that you can use to address the structural type issues. Now, the first one of those is you can, if you like, merge all of the practices in the PCN into one. So by creating a single practice, that practice effectively becomes the PCN. Well, not effectively, it is the PCN. And there are a number of these around in the country. There are, you know, if you're lucky enough to be a practice which is big enough to be a PCN, or if you merge the practices within the PCN into one, it solves the problems, because there's no sharing that goes on. All of the activity is within the one practice. However, it's one of those things which theoretically sounds fine, but would you really do that? Would you really do that just for the PCN? Ultimately practices are not merged for perfectly good business reasons, because usually you don't want to, and because you run them differently, and because you like running your own business and you like to be an independent practitioner, and they run it differently down the road, and why would you want to run it like they do? So it's like your accountant saying, get married, there's loads of tax advantages. Yeah, but you don't really do it for that. And that same thing about merging practices. So of the 250 odd PCNs we've worked with, 2 of them have done this, and they were both 2 practice PCNs who had anyway been talking about merging. So yes, in theory, but really not the choice that most PCNs are going to do. So that leaves you 2 choices. Option 2 is to collaborate with the federation. Now that works. But if you move, if as a PCN, you move all of the PCN activity into the federation, and the federation employs all the R's resources and sets up something called a cost sharing group, and contracts from the federation, you can do that and you can minimize many of these structural risks. The problem that we often see here is this something you really want to do? Because what you're doing is you're passing all of the PCN activity to the federation. Now, if all of the practices in the PCN work really well with the federation, then that's great. If that isn't the case, then it becomes more challenging. So this really comes down to a governance choice of how well, first of all, do you have a local federation which you're happy to work with to do this? And secondly, what are the relationships like between the practices and the federation? Because ultimately federations are not PCNs, they are much bigger than that. So therefore they're governed in a different way. They're governed generally at a level of about CCG. So you, as a result, if you're a PCN, you have to ask permission from the federation before you do things. And if you've got great relationships, that's super, and it works in many places across the country. If the relationships aren't so close and you want to have more control of your own destiny, then it may not be the answer for you. So for those who don't want to do that, what is the answer? The answer is actually that what we call incorporate the PCN. I think, to be honest, I was the person who thought about the word incorporate PCN, and I'm actually regretting it a little bit, but everybody uses it now. So well, that's what we tend to call it. But what you're really doing is you're setting up a company for the PCN, for the core network practices to own, and then you move all of the PCN activity into that company. It's a captive company. I actually prefer to call it a shared service center. It's a company which only does what the PCN wants it to do. So only does what the practices and the PCN wants it to do, nothing else. And it's controlled by those practices, and its only function is to do shared things for those practices, of which the most obvious shared thing is the PCN DES and all of the activity within the PCN DES. So that is the option which I'm going to look at now, because it's the one which requires the most thinking about, well, how does it work?